All right, so Krystal was very kind and she wanted me to weigh in on some of the Republican attacks on Kamala Harris. So we're gonna start with one that was been making the rounds. Kamala is allegedly, quote, what is it, the original Hawk Tuah girl. This was on Fox Business. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, and then there's the DEI press secretary telling you that the DEI vice president is the future of the party here. And so the future looks kind of dim for the Democrats here, but this is no shocker either. Kamala Harris, she's the original Hawk Tuah girl. That's the way she got where she is. And the party's going downhill if it's in her hands.
That was tough. That was harsh.
That was harsh. Look, I would just say this, let's just not go into it. All right, in general, I talked with Emily about it. I have annoyance with some of this because some of this, it's like, well, what is allowed to be talked about and not? So with Trump, it's like, okay, well, we have now spent years litigating, did he have sex with Stormy Daniels up until the point of what, I'm not going to go into, let's just say the very personal details of Donald Trump's anatomy, what the exact sexual encounter was between the two. That was a key thing against him. So it's
it was in the context of a campaign payment and cover up. That was the context there.
But then the Karen McDougal thing also, many of Trump's affairs. So Trump's sex life was totally out in the open. So it's like, oh, were we not allowed to talk about Kamala, basically having an affair with a very powerful, a relationship with a powerful San Francisco mayor, and clearly how that, contributed to her rise to the top. I would say it's fine to talk about. I wouldn't talk about it that way. But in general, let's just take it back to where we were in the beginning of this, show, which is, if we're talking about suburban women and abortion, I would probably just avoid.
I was just going to say. I would encourage Republicans, please continue this line of attack. Laura Loomer, please continue talking about Kamala Harris's uterus and theorizing about her whole entire life. Please. The other thing about this, Saagar, and this fits with the DEI hit as well, this shit is so online. And so to people that understand it, it's repellent, right? Even the Fox Business lady there is repelled by it, and he's been pulled off there. He hasn't been seen since.
Well, he is making it explicitly sexual, and that's part of the thing that I'll get into with the DEI thing, which is, by the way, I don't think anything should be off limits. I think it's fine. I think it is weird that when she was 29, she was dating Willie Brown. I think very obviously for political purposes. I think that's weird. It tells me a little about her sociopathic personality that basically is required to become president. So I think she is just like anyone who wants to be president. Many of these people are willing to do anything in order to ascend to power. And that's basically a requirement for the arrogance to think that you should be president. Okay, so let's leave it at that. Now, I didn't say that in a sexist way. Note that I just put it in exactly the same terms of many people who want to climb to the very top are willing to do anything to do that. So I think in that context, it's fine. Now, I would not put it in an explicitly sexual terms the way that, I don't know who that guy was, the Fox Business analyst or whatever.
Let me tell you what his Twitter profile says, because you'll enjoy this.
Please, hit me.
It says, a father of 4, host of First Class Fatherhood.
Oof. All right. Yeah. See, would you talk about your daughter that way? Would you, want to talk about women that way in general? Like I said, this whole slut shaming thing, I wouldn't do it personally. I think talking about it in terms of what it reveals about character and background, I think that's totally on brand. And I think fine, in the same way that I think the talking about Trump and his sexual promiscuity, or especially sexual braggadocio in the past, reveals obviously something insecure about him and about his love of the tabloids and all of that. So in general, the reason why I don't trust Republicans to talk about this is probably the same reason that Mike Johnson's told them not to talk about DEI. It's not that it's not legitimate. It's that, can we really trust the people who brought us Todd Aiken, and who was the other one who made the comments about rape? Indiana? I'm forgetting his name. It's something. It's totally on the top of my head. But my point is that, can we really trust these boomers who are, or even people who are making Hawk Tuah comments on national television, talking about the vice presidential candidate? Can we trust them to talk about it in a nuance and I think in a way that could possibly make it a hit for the American people? No, I can't trust them about it. Especially on the sexual thing, I would just let it be. I mean, look, like I said, when we've got Trump on the ticket too, let's all call it even.
I mean, this guy's argument that he made on Fox Business, which I've seen made, he's not the only one. This is being made, online incessantly. The DEI thing obviously is being made by members of Congress and op-ed writers and whatever. His argument about her is that she's black and she's a whore. Again, if that's where you want to go with this, good luck. Because the other thing is, part of how this is not an effective attack is Trump is not engaged in any of this.
I wouldn't put it past him, though,
but here's the thing.
I'd be curious to see what he says.
Here's the thing though, Saagar. Like, let me put my moralizing aside because I do think this is a disgusting thing to say about anyone. And I think the DEI thing too, I'm sure talk more about this, but whatever original like good faith critique of DEI programs that existed, which I share some of, by the way, like it's clearly just become a term for a slur for like a Black person with a job. And that's the way it's been used typically. But the bigger problem with both the Haktua thing and the DEI thing is it reveals this like super niche, overly online type of brain. That was why Vivek didn't do well in his campaign. It was why Ron DeSantis didn't do well in his campaign, because they had these like niche online fixations, including a bizarre terminology that wouldn't even be familiar to most Americans. Like, to the extent that most Americans would know the term DEI, it would be like Black people who find it to be basically a slur, Black people who were increasingly open to a Republican message, by the way, or people who are just like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what are you even talking about? So that's why Trump never he never talked about ESG, he never talked about DEI, he made fun of the fixation on wokeness because he saw it for being this like overly niche online concern that doesn't land for normie Americans. So outside of the fact that I think there are certain demographic groups that will find this type of language and tech repellent, I also think it's just like way too online.
I'm not willing to go there on DEI yet, because DEI is a term that actually means something. Now, personally, I would not use DEI. I would just say affirmative action, which is far more accurate and I think correct about who she is and about why she was picked for the vice president, et cetera. But that is like, I don't know. Let's think of a leftist equivalent where just because somebody has used the term improperly, does that mean that you just stop and it's become publicly defined or used as something else? Does that mean you give up on the term? Like, I don't think so. I mean, DEI is a real thing. It basically means affirmative action for minority groups. It embodies the whole equity versus equality. And that's a mindset and philosophy that Kamala believes in, including putting out equity cartoons. So calling her a DEI candidate is empirically true. She was picked for her race. She was picked because she was a Black woman. If you look back at the time, Amy Klobuchar, Gretchen Whitmer, and her were on the final list. BLM madness was happening. Jim Clyburn says, you gotta pick a Black lady, and he picked a Black lady, even though he didn't like her. And she wasn't all that politically effective and failed in the primary. That is literally DEI.
Here's what I would say.
Yeah.
The vice presidential pick is almost by definition a DEI pick. Joe Biden was put on the ticket with Barack Obama because he's a white dude. Like, you're always picked. I mean, what are we talking about with regard to who Kamala will pick? We're like, it's gonna be a white guy.
Yes.
Is that a DEI
Yes,
pick?
That's my point.
But here's the thing,
when you get picked for your race, that is
Saagar,
DEI.
here's the thing.
Yeah.
None of these people, and you, by the way, too, you would never talk about them that way. You would never use the term DEI to describe them, even though they're also being picked for their race or other demographic characters. Mike Pence picked because he's an evangelical with, ties into that community. No one called him a DEI pick. And that goes to my point of what this has come to mean, whatever you might mean when you say it, what it has come to mean is a Black person with a job.
Okay.
And remember how they used it with the Baltimore mayor, right?
Sure.
So democratically
just
elected
idiot
mayor.
Says it on Twitter,
no, but
that doesn't define everything.
Yeah, but you know that this is not just one idiot on Twitter. I mean, that's how they're using it in this context too. And it's not used consistently. Joe Biden was a DEI vice presidential pick. Mike Pence was a DEI presidential pick, a vice presidential pick. JD Vance was picked because of his, unique ties in the Rust Belt. Or was he a DEI vice presidential pick? No, of course they would never talk about them that way because it's only used to talk about Black people. But let me just say, again, I encourage you to continue this line of attack. I encourage you to continue in this direction because not only is it off-putting for a demographic group that, was starting to be like somewhat open to Republicans, and I don't think just Black people, also, you have a lot, as you were saying before, you have a lot of suburban white people who don't want to see themselves as racist. If they're going to vote against Kamala Harris, they want a non-racial based or gender-based reason to vote against her. So, not only is it off-putting, but again, part of the problem for Republicans in 2022 was the sense of you guys are just out there, you're weird, you're fixated on this fringe stuff. And all this DEI, ESG, all this hyper online fixation, Haktua girl, do you think my mom knows what that is? No, she doesn't, okay? So I encourage Republicans to continue in this direction. I think this is going to work out very well for
I'm
them.
not defending Haktua, but here is why, and this, you brought up an important point, so let's think about the history. Affirmative action was literally created for Black people. There's a reason why the term is inextricably linked. Now, part of the problem with affirmative action,
but that's what makes it an explicitly racial
But this is what I'm saying. The problem with affirmative action is that it became DEI, which became an all-encompassing term that got fused with BIPOC, ESG, all of this like minority obsession. So whites are by definition not a minority, which is why the term is not traditionally used with that. Now, as a mindset itself, by the way, I oppose racial preferences. I oppose voting for people because of race, and I don't believe in racial exceptionalism or any of this stuff. And I would have opposed it back in the 1960s too. The policy has been a disaster for the United States, which is why I think striking down affirmative action was a good thing. Now, calling her a DEI candidate, again, is empirically true when you utilize your race in the midst of the greatest racial hysteria in this country since the 1960s and use that to cross your opponents when your own record itself is one of political disaster in the campaign, and you failed with Black voters.
Amy Coney Barrett, Trump had said he wanted to put on
That's an affirmative action pick. That's correct. Yes.
Do any of these people ever talk about
people
it that
on
way?
the right actually did call Amy Coney Barrett an affirmative action
I've never heard any of these people complain about her being a DEI affirmative action candidate. It isn't, and you just acknowledge it's an explicitly racialized
it was developed for race purposes.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying.
It's fair to talk about it.
The argument, but I'm just saying, you're making an explicitly racialized argument then that the problem with Kamala Harris is based on her race and her gender.
No. That's not the problem. That's a fair attack. Is that you didn't earn where you are because of your race, which is true.
But the same is true of Joe Biden. The same is true of Mike Pence.
That's accurate.
The vice presidential pick, it's not a nobody earns it. They get plucked out of wherever for their demographic characteristics and what group people think they're going to appeal to. So I'm not saying you can't say it. Say it. Please, go ahead. Make the case. Go for it. I'm saying I do not think that this is a wise direction for Republicans to go in. Because let me just add to this, because I was thinking about, all right, if I was gonna go after Kamala Harris, like, how would I do it? Mm-hmm. What would be the most effective thing? Because I think that we have sort of a model for that because of the failure of her 2020 presidential campaign. What was it?
She believes in nothing.
What was it that was a problem for her? It was a couple things. It was that she believes in nothing, right? She's just a cipher. She's like, just will say whatever's convenient in the moment. So she's a political chameleon. And the sense of incompetence that came from like the inability to run a campaign, her stumbles on the trail, et cetera, et cetera. So make that case. Those things don't have anything to do with her being a Black woman or a slut, right? This has to do everything with her own capabilities and where she's been and how she's been all over the place. And that rings a lot more true. The other thing that, this is very predictable. Like the thing Trump is actually going with is, she's radical left, she's radical liberal, et cetera. I think this probably has more traction.
It definitely does.
And is more over the target of what would make sense. But it also, effective attacks really have to ring true. And what rings a lot more true with Kamala Harris isn't that she is some hardcore committed lefty ideologue. It's that she doesn't believe in anything at all. So if I was going against Kamala Harris, I would leave her race and gender beside because, like I said, people who want to vote against her, most Americans don't want to see themselves as explicitly racist or sexist, right? They want to have some other reason that they can point to that they're voting against her other than that she's, a whore or a DEI pick. They want to have something they can point to that absolves them of any potential implication of racism or sexism. So that's why I think these attacks, I think they're just instantly repellent, off-putting to certain groups. And I just don't think it's the most effective direction for Republicans to go to in terms of making a case against her. And there is a very clear case that can be made against her.
I don't disagree with the case you're making, but let me make the case for the DEI affirmative action thing. Nobody suffered more in this country by affirmative action than white working class voters. So if this is the white working class election.
They're already voting for Trump.
Well, no, not necessarily. Joe Biden was breaking 30%, 40% white working class. I mean, it's like with blacks, margins matter. Black voters, 90-10 and 80-20 is literally the difference between 400 electoral votes and 260, right? That's part of the reason why Trump's meaningful gains, he was winning like 15% of the black vote, but that's still a lot more than 10. So if the affirmative action line can, mobilize white working class voters in the industrial Midwest. It's not a bad thing. And if you look at Hillbilly Elegy and the history of the Scots-Irish people, I'm forgetting, Jim Webb's book. If you look at those two things, a core theme is about racial discontent and the obsession with democratic elites of affirmative action. And so I think JD has a line in Hillbilly Elegy, something about, people on the floor being upset because somebody got promoted because they were black. Or Jim Webb has talked a lot about this in the past, about how affirmative action is one of the reasons that he left the Democratic Party, then pointing to the person who is literally only in her position. I mean, can we acknowledge, Krystal, that she would not win an open Democratic primary, like in 2020?
Obviously in 2020 she didn't.
Right.
I think this time there's a decent chance she would have, just because of her position as vice president.
But that's after selection for her race, right?
But again, that's like almost definitionally the case of every vice presidential candidate. So, I mean, listen, if you want to the case you're making is, let's double down on racial grievance.
That's not a racial grievance. It's empirically true.
It's obviously a racial grievance. Even if you say it's a legitimate racial grievance, it is a racial grievance. It is white working class feeling like black people got things they didn't deserve.
Not just black people. A lot of minority groups got promoted because they weren't necessarily the most qualified for the job.
Even taking any sort of morality out of that, it is definitionally a racial grievance. I don't think that is an effective strategy at this point in time. And it's not the coalition that Trump is trying to go after this time. I mean, they've really been trying to expand into a more diverse coalition.
Yeah.
They have a lot of problems with suburban women that they know is going to be a major issue. So, I think the J.D. Vance vice presidential pick was a foolish one for this exact reason, because it's also just doubling down on a base that is already with you. You already have the enthusiasm of this group. And again, to me, the fact that Trump, who is not, he's not above saying anything and, everything all the time when he thinks it serves him, that he's not making these arguments, I think tells you a lot about the political foolishness of going in this direction.
It's only been 5 days, right, that Trump has been on the election. They had one rally since then.
But we know that he's eschewed all this DEI, ESG, woke, he has eschewed all of that language very clearly. And even made fun of Ron DeSantis.
And I think says is woke. I don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the rock that Ron DeSantis crashed into, is his fixation with these things that are hyper online and somewhat niche, and just feel weird and fringe to a lot of normie Americans, putting aside the debate we're having about the morality and whatever.
I think if I were Trump, I don't think it's a bad attack. Like I said, with winning white working class and trying to, now, let's say, I would use the term affirmative action because I think it's also the most accurate. Now, I'm also going to object, though, that you can't just throw these claims out, because notice who I'm not going to call a DI candidate. Barack Obama. Barack Obama rightfully won the presidency and his primary election on the strength of his own name. And I don't think, if anything, if he had racial headwinds or whatever, it was far stronger in 2008, and he blew it out of the water. I don't think he was a DEI candidate. He was never selected. He was never anointed. He was never given a position. He fought the Clinton establishment and he won. That's actually an inspiring racial story. And that's part of the reason why you can connect to that. That's why white working class people can connect to that. Obama grew up, his background, that was everything. Kamala is a different story. I mean, she was selected because of her race.
Right, but
and I'm not going to I'm not going to just put away and say, we're not allowed to say that, in my opinion,
did I say you're not allowed?
Okay, fine.
But listen, but
that
again,
it won't be potent as well.
Joe Biden was also selected for his race.
But it's not the same, Krystal, because at least at that time, they would lie about it, and they said it's for his foreign policy
but hold
experience.
on. It is almost,
the veneer matters.
It's almost
too.
exactly the same. The veneer matters. It's almost exactly the same, because he ran in that primary. And he failed miserably.
Yes,
and
that's probably why he's not a very good candidate.
He multiple times failed miserably. So because this is the thing on, the legitimate knock on Kamala is well, you ran and you failed and then you just got plucked up. Well, it was literally the same thing with Joe Biden. But that was never used against him. He was never called,
No, that's not true. It was.
Credibility, his, legitimacy in the position was never called into question. And Kamala Harris, I mean, she won statewide in a large, very diverse, very economically powerful state multiple times. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to believe that. What's his name? Willie Brown.
Willie Brown.
This one man cannot possibly be responsible for every single thing that happens every election that occurs in the state of California. At some level, to the extent that there's any democratic process at play, She earned her stripes in the state of California. She won primaries. She won statewide multiple times. She served in office. People got to evaluate her credentials, et cetera, et cetera. And she got put in as vice president in the same way that every vice president gets picked, by nature of her demographic characteristics and who they thought she could appeal to. Now, I think it is racist to assume Black people are gonna vote for a Black person just because of their identity. I think it is way more complex than that. But you can't deny that the whole discussion we're having around Kamala Harris and how she'll pick her VP is about their demographic characters and who they'll appeal to and what their background is and all of those things. That's like just how VPs get picked. So I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair for that to be held specifically against her when it's not held against anyone else who doesn't happen to be Black. And I also, like I said, I hope Republicans continue in this direction because I think it's a very ineffective, off-putting, overly online attack. I think if you polled most of the public, they couldn't even tell you what DEI even means.
I agree, but they might know what affirmative action means, and they are two sides of the same coin. So I'm just gonna, look, we'll see. We'll find out in November. I think as a person who is a minority, can I play my minority card now? If I ever got promoted or ascended or whatever because of my race, I'd be mortified because of it. So anybody who's out there who supports this type of crap, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, in my opinion. And I think it's the stupidest thing. Now, again, part of the reason why I connect with the affirmative action message is explicitly because I despise people whose only characteristic about them is making it all about their race. That's not interesting. Like, what color you're born is not interesting at all. What you believe and what you're gonna do for others, that's again why I at least revere Barack Obama as a political animal, using his background as both a black man,
right,
and also his white mother and his grandparents growing up in Kansas to create a story that everyone could connect to. That was genuinely inspiring. I mean, I remember thinking about it at the time, and to this day is one of those where everyone can, but that's not necessarily unique about his race. Clinton was very effective in the same thing. He literally said, like, I grew up in a trailer park. I was trailer trash. And that's one of the reasons why they even called him at the time the first Black president, which is stupid, but because he connected a lot with Black voters. So that's my point, is that it's not about race per se. It's about connecting with what people feel icky about the other person. Now, one of the attacks against her is she was selected because of her race. She's never been truly tested in the fire of democracy. Now, I think
she won statewide
okay.
Saagar.
This is a machine politics state. If you have D next to your name, you win.
People still have to vote for you.
There's a fake primary to pass the post.
People still get to vote in the state of California. It's not like a dictatorship
the entire time. I mean, this is like saying a white guy in Alabama has been tested.
They even have, I'm not sure how long they've had it, but now they have the jungle primary where you are up against very likely a Democrat in the fall as well. I mean, listen, it's a machine state, but you still have to win votes.
Sure, yeah.
So I just think, I just don't think that's fair. Delaware is also a state where if you just have a D by your name, you get elected. And I don't remember anyone calling into question Joe Biden's credibility because of that. So that's why I just think it's really very unfair. And I think it is a foolish—
We'll find out.
I think it's a foolish direction to go in, and it makes it explicitly racializes the argument against her, and I don't.
But then why is she allowed to explicitly racialize it? And the media, it's so important to have a Black woman. I'm like, I don't care if you're a Black woman. It's like, what are you going to do for me?
I haven't even. I haven't heard her say that. But to your point about Barack Obama, all political candidates except for Bernie Sanders, they use their identity. Like, they talk about their biography. That Trump as the business guy, right? Like,
that's a whole
he uses his biography and his identity as well. Like, that's part and parcel of what you do. So I don't find it I don't find her talking about her identity to be some crime against the country. I think it's far more important what she's gonna do. I think the fact that she hasn't stood for anything, and even after all these years in politics, I have no clue what this woman actually believes. I think that's a problem. But for her to talk about her identity, and for people to aspirationally want to, that was part of the appeal. Barack, remember how excited people were when he was elected in 2000. I know you were a baby, but they were excited. Even people who weren't really Democrats or didn't even vote for, they were excited because of what it said about the country, right? She benefits from that as well. And I think for Republicans to try to make an explicitly racial or gender-based case against her. I just think that will backfire, especially given the coalition they're trying to put together.
I'm not sure I agree, just because we have lived through BLM madness, we lived through anti-racism baby and all this other. I mean, people are fed up with a lot of this stuff. I mean, look, I'm not saying the CRT thing was like a big winner, but I think if you look at the general trend, people are mostly gone past. People are mostly past a lot of the BLM nonsense that was, you know, shoved down our throats for an entire, what, 2-3 years in this country. I can't be the only one who was further radicalized on race as a question of that in terms of being explicitly against racialism in American politics. And
but that's the thing, Saagar, is that's actually the biggest danger, is that right now Republicans are the ones that appear to be engaged in that racialism. Because I do think you're right that Americans have an instinct towards like the colorblind ideal.
And they should. I think that's a good thing.
And so when you're making an explicitly racialized case, it flips from, you know, Democrats. There was a time when Democrats were the ones who were like word policing and nannies and PC and cancel culture and all this stuff. And then Republicans flipped the script because they got so obsessed with wokeness that it seemed like you guys are the ones who are obsessed with this stuff. And it's the same dynamic now. Kamala Harris is out there talking about, like, you know, the normal Democratic side, abortion and middle class, about all this stuff. And Republicans are out here making an explicitly racialized case. I think to a country that really prefers a colorblind self-perception at the very least, they find the explicitly racialized arguments when they were made by Democrats, but now when they're being made by Republicans, to be off-putting, repellent, and not appealing. That's what I think, because I do think that like the colorblind view where you're not obsessing over these demographic characteristics is far more salient, far more reflective of like the aspirational place Americans want to be. And so when it's Republicans who are the ones who are talking about, you know, racial characteristics, they're the ones in danger of sort of violating that precept of, oh, we're, you know, supposed to be a colorblind country.
I personally, though, I feel a bit gaslit on this conversation, because it's like you can't, and I'm not talking about you, but I'm saying media, Democrats, and others, you can't spend the last 25 years of American politics making everything about race. And then when people say, hey, you were selected because of your race, you're like, you're bringing up race. It's like, hold on a second. What? Like, what just happened here? So I am skeptical that this will have the negative effect, because like I said, I think there are a lot of people out there. I mean, the affirmative action thing, that was very popular for most people whenever it was struck down. I think it's actually a decent attack. I don't trust anybody who was selected by affirmative action. Now, especially whenever it's the most important job in the entire world. So I think that's a decent enough attack. Now, also, for now, she's talking about abortion. How soon until we see explicit racialism that comes from her, about diversity quotas, about the people who she's surrounded with, what percent of her staff is going to be black women or whatever, or Asian men, or any of that? I mean, are we really saying that that instinct is dead in the modern Democratic Party? Like, of course not. The Biden administration has racial quotas, literally, for people who work for them. So this is somebody who also, she always talked about the amount, her diversity in her office. So, like, you can't both believe in that and then get upset whenever it's used against you. Now, if I were her, I agree. I would only talk about abortion and middle-class issues. But I have no doubt that she, and especially if not her, the media and her surrogates will also make it into a thing. And I'm just not convinced yet that the backlash, now I wouldn't say use DEI, I would say affirmative action and against racialism specifically, which I think Democrats are the people who mostly use that rhetoric and have dominated the conversation now for a long time. I think pushing back against that is potent, has been for, I can only speak for myself. I don't know. We've only been here now for a week. I find it repellent that she was selected for that reason. I think
But do you find it repellent that Joe Biden was selected for that? Or do you find it repellent J.D. Vance was selected because of his character?
But he wasn't selected explicitly because he was white.
Yes, he was.
No, and this is the other thing. The lies we tell ourselves also matter.
Do you find it?
They said we're picking her because she's black.
Do you find it repellent that right now the just bedrock assumption is Kamala Harris got to pick a white man?
Actually,
is that repellent?
Yes, I do, because you shouldn't.
I haven't heard you say or anyone else say anything about that.
No. Notice when I said Josh Shapiro, I said it because he's a actually popular governor. That's why I mean, we're about to talk about VP. But
right.
I'm based on your statistics. I mean, I would pick Gretchen Whitmer if I were to. I wouldn't necessarily pick a white man because she's popular in the state of Michigan. You got to win Michigan. I mean, if she was black, I wouldn't care either. Who's the governor of Maryland? What's that guy's name? Wes Moore?
Wes Moore.
He's a decent candidate. You pick him too. I think he could win. I'm serious. I mean, this is somebody who's from around here. He speaks well, right? He's one of those where he does a good job on the stump. I think he's quite popular, and he do a decent job with some of these swing voters. Like I just made the case.
Was it repellent that Mike Pence got picked because he was an evangelical?
Well,
it was a smart play. It was tactically smart. This is my point. Sarah Palin picked because she was a woman.
Yeah, that was actually stupid
and she was young, and she was picked for her. I don't remember anyone saying it's repellent that she was picked for her demographic characteristics. So why is it repellent when it's a black woman picked for her characteristics, and it's not repellent when it's a white man picked for his characteristics?
Because they made the whole conversation about race, like I said, the last 20 the media and Democrats who are literally donning themselves in kente cloth, putting George Floyd and BLM signs up in every restaurant in the country, and then expecting everyone to just sit there and be like, oh, this is actually totally fine, that we've completely lost our minds on all of this discussion. And then it's like getting mad whenever you say, hey, that was actually crazy. You were picked because of these reasons. Why shouldn't we say that that's bad?
But because it's not applied uniformly. That's my point. It's only applied when it's a black person. That's the point.
But they are the ones
if you're
who
going to
made
make the case, if you're going to make the case that people shouldn't be picked for the demographic characteristics, I am on board for that conversation. But that is not the case that's made. The case is only made. That's why DEI has just come to mean a black person with a job. It's only made when it is black people. It's no problem when a white dude gets picked because he's a white dude, or an evangelical dude gets picked because he's an evangelical dude, or he's picked because he's from Pennsylvania or whatever. That's no problem. That's fine and isn't a mark against them. And so it's just a blatant double standard. And like I said, listen, you can make the case all you want. It's fine. I have no issue with it. Make the case. But I think Republicans run a real risk of being seen as the party that is obsessed with race in the election. And you're right. The party that seems like they're obsessed with race, like Democrats did with the Kente Clause and all that stuff, right? The party that seems like they are obsessed with identity characteristics is in a poor position. And right now it's the Republicans who seem much more obsessed with her being a woman and being a black woman. And
I think it's too early to tell, and we'll see. I'm not going to put it past the BLM people to bring it all right back circle, especially
the BLM people actually opposed Kamala Harris's coronation, by the way, for what it's worth. They wanted an open convention.
Yeah, I don't believe that for a second.
They put on a whole thing.
What? We're going to object to Miss Bail Fund? Like, what are we doing here? Like, that's ridiculous. But look, anyway, I'll tell you what. If Republicans lose, and they lose even more of the black vote and suburban white vote than they did in 2020, then I'll think you're right. But if they don't, then I'm going to say I think it was actually a smart play. And I'm curious to see how it actually resonates with the people. So why don't you think
that Donald Trump is making this argument?
Because it's only been out for 5 days, because he got shot in the ear, and he's only had enough time to say laughing Kamala, or what is it, lying Kamala?
It's both.
Oh, yeah, okay, whatever. I think laughing is better, for the record.
These terms he has studiously avoided all of these terms because they sound like a secret language to like normal voters.
I agree. Don't use the term DEI. Use the term affirmative action. That's accurate. Everybody knows what that one means, and everybody also is going to know that that's correct whenever it's used against her. But okay, I think we probably beat this conversation.
Yeah. So the other argument that they've been making is that she is insufficiently pro-Israel, which I think is another electoral loser in terms of arguments against her. I think we have C5 of evidence of this case that's being made against her this week. Let's take a listen.
This is an astounding bad decision not to appear behind Bibi as Vice President of the United States. This is a signal to Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran that we literally do not have Bibi's back. This is really her first major foreign policy decision, and she's gotten an F.
Already you got a question. She will not show up for the Prime Minister's joint session of Congress today. She'd rather address in the summer a sorority, a college sorority, like she can't get out of that.
What she's doing is she's running away from Israel. She refuses to go to Bibi Netanyahu is in Washington. She refuses to be there. Even if you're against Israel or you're against the Jewish people, show up and listen to the concept. But she's totally against the Jewish people. And it amazes me how Jewish people will vote for the Democrats when they're being treated so disrespectfully and badly. It amazes me. It's shocking. I don't. So now we have a new victim to defeat. Lion Kamala Harris, Lyon, Lyin apostrophe.
So
I'm not going with Lyon. Lyon is not his best work. Not even
Laughing
close.
Kamala also not his best work.
Lyon Ted worked because it really, this one, yeah, Laughing, I could see it. I don't know. He needs something better.
Yeah.
He needs to bring the magic back.
Also the, honestly, Crazy Kamala.
Crazy Kamala
even though he's
good.
used crazy for a bunch of time, I would be probably, I think it would be better than those. But
Crazy Nancy? Is that right?
insufficiently pro-Israel, I also don't think is the political winner that they.
Look, I don't think people care that much about Israel, especially now today. Maybe some young voters, even then it's not the majority. So like, I don't think it's gonna be the deciding election. In terms of the money though, that's where a lot of money is for donors. So
Yeah,
that's probably why he's doing it.
That's it. But it's also like, you know, to the extent, so I think for young voters, it does matter. I think they're watching very closely what Kamala Harris does and says in these next few days. And I think that is consequential for her in terms of being able to put together that sort of recapture some of the Obama coalition. But for a broader general electorate, to the extent that it matters at all, it's the sense of like, why are you fixated on these? Why are you obsessed over these foreign countries when, you know, we got a lot of problems here?
Yeah, listen, so. I count myself part of that. I don't really care what, you know, about whether she's sufficiently pro-Israel or not, but whatever. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.